The next thing I want to hit on before we get out of here is a comment I saw from an article from an ESPN's Tim Bontemps. He did kind of an off-season anonymous review amongst some executives and scouts, which he kind of just sent some questions around to a group of people. They sent back responses and voted on certain things. And one of them was, the categories was, which draft pick surprised you the most, or was the biggest reach, sorry. And Ron Holland and the Pistons got 4 votes, and that was the most. I think they were tied with somebody else. I don't have it in front of me. But basically, this executive said, the reason he voted for the Pistons was, he said, I feel bad for Cade Cunningham. They've been rebuilding for years, even though they never planned on it. And this pick, Ron Holland, signals they might need to blow up the roster and start over again. I just don't see how Holland plays with Asar and Jaden Ivey and all the other guys. That situation is a mess. Even when Holland was scoring in Vegas, it was so ugly to watch. So pretty adamant there in how poor the Holland pick was. But the topic I wanted to discuss more so is, are the Pistons actually a mess right now? And I feel like I've seen a lot of this with the national media in their response to the Pistons offseason overall, in kind of critiquing the Tobias Harris signing and people clowning Detroit for handing him that contract, which, yes, it might be a slight overpay, but I feel like Tobias Harris was always going to get something around 20 million a year annually, or maybe 17, 18. But I feel like the Pistons have been clowned a little bit unfairly, and I think they're the team that are easy to, beat down on. And to be honest, the way they performed last season, it's kind of, in a way, like, I don't blame people for doing it. But I think people are still holding this organization to the past regime. There's been a lot of changes in the front office. We have a new GM, a whole new staff of executive vice presidents, apart from one, Eric Tallum, who was elevated. But there's a whole, pretty much 2/3 of the front office, it feels like, has been cleaned out. The coaching staff has pretty much, at least in terms of assistants, and the head coach have changed. Apart from Jarrett Jack, I think all the other assistants are new, at least the front of bench assistants, I should say. And then obviously the roster's seen changes. So I think to call this situation an absolute mess, I think, is an overstatement if you're just talking about this offseason. If you're talking about the Pistons in the past 4 years, then sure, it's hard to go around that. But the way I read this comment was that the Pistons situation now and going forward is a mess, which I disagree with. And I get why people are down on the Holland pick in terms of the shooting, and his fit alongside Asar and Ivy. I do see why people would think that's a mess and why that affects Cade. But the way I look at it is that Trajan Langdon, the way he's spoken about this team and the way I think he's going to build this team going forward, is going to be a lot more patient. I think this is really, truly a resetting of a rebuild. Like, I know that might hurt for some people to hear in terms of what they expect for this season, upcoming season, but this is kind of, I feel like Langdon is going to come in, and he has come in, and like, he's kind of starting fresh. There's no, like, the fact he hasn't made really a win now trade. He said the whole time he's looking to acquire assets. I think like, he would be very well aware that this team, as constructed with their young talent and the vets they've added, is still a lottery team. And I mean, I think there's some pros in being a lottery team this season with Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, and some of the other prospects that are meant to be in this draft, which I believe is meant to be pretty talented. And before you say, well, Jack, that they can't finish with the worst record, we've done that the past 4 years. Look at how the draft has gone for the Pistons recently. The Atlanta Hawks got the number 1 pick this year, and they were a play-in team. So I think, even if the Pistons have the 7th worst, like, the Pistons have had the worst record the past 2 years and had picked 5th. So you can still win high 20s games, low 30s games and get a top 3 pick. That's just how the lottery works now. So I think Langdon would certainly have an eye on that and be wanting to pick some of his own young talent if the Pistons get close enough in this draft. So I think essentially that Langdon, this rebuild has reset, and I don't think it's a mess. In terms of cap space and that kind of thing, I don't think the Pistons made any. They didn't make any long-term signings in terms of new players. Obviously, they re-signed Cade to a max, which they were always going to do. The Fontecchio deal was only 2 years. The apologies. The Fontecchio deal was only 2 years. Malik Beasley was only 1 year. Hardaway Jr. is a free agent. They basically haven't tied themselves to anything long-term. And I think, I think we're going to see a lot of like Ivy, Asar, Duren on this team now opening night. But, it feels like any of them, I think Langdon will be assessing them and figuring out if he likes them or that kind of thing. I don't think it's a lock. All those guys are here long-term. I feel like there's much more probably of an investment in Holland. That's not to say he doesn't value. I don't think he doesn't value any of these other prospects. I just think this rebuild is kind of reset, and they just happen to have all these young players in Cade Cunningham as opposed to starting from ground zero. But I don't think this situation's a mess. I think the cap sheet, from what I've seen, is fine. They can still make plenty of moves and be flexible, and they've pretty much refreshed all key parts of the organization in terms of on-court performance. So I think call it a mess is a reach. Let me know your thoughts because, this is probably the best I felt about a Pistons team since the Cade draft or since the Ivy Duren draft before that season. So in the last 2 years. So let me know your thoughts. Do you think the Pistons are a mess? I think it's a reach, but I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts as always. But that'll do it for today's show. I'll be back, as I said, on the regular schedule. So we'll be back Tuesday unless there's any breaking news. And as always, go Pistons.